Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome into this episode of Ragnarok. Now it's Garden of Doom, and we're talking about Norse Mythology, a show I've been looking forward to for a long time. And we're bringing back one of our favorite guests, repeat guest. This is his fourth appearance on Garden of Doom. It's Christopher Ambs. It's like Silence of the Ambs. He's got his own introduction. I'm not going to spoil it for him. But he's been with us on the question of indigeny. He's been with us on the Gnostic Gospels. I think we call it the Apocryphal Gospel, something like that. And also on the Trinity Infinity, which was a show on lots of different denominations of Christianity. And just to give a sort of a overlook, a poor man's version of what are some of the differences between the many, many sects of Christianity. Of course, we only scratched the surface there, but I think we hit the 20 or 30 so best known denominations. And he's going to come back again in a few months. We're going to talk about Mormonism because Chris was an ordained Mormon minister. But today we're talking about a whole different thing. My favorite paganism, or at least tied for first and I might have three tied, but Norse is my favorite. Anyway, without further ado, Chris, welcome into the garden one more time.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm happy to be here. Always happy to be here. I feel like I have my own little planter in the garden somewhere. It's my planter, and I get to just sort of hang out here sometimes. And I'm thankful that I get to. Yes, I'm Christopher Ambs. That's AMBS, like lambs with no L, or bullshit first thing in the morning. Since we're getting into Norseism and what's called Asatru, or the Norse religion, I should point out that my last name, Ambs, AMBS, is a bastardization of the German word Ampsis, which means ant, and so you can kind of gather from that my ancestors actually worshipped what we're going to be talking about today. So
that's great. It's not for ambassador because you're so diplomatic.
No, and I'm not.
Okay, my mistake. I get confused easily, as you well know. So take us from the top. I don't know if you want to go to the origin story or take us to the Norse version of In the Beginning.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I kind of want to touch on where we get these stories from, so that people have a bit of an understanding that where we're getting a lot of this information is not firsthand accounts necessarily. This isn't, Leif Erikson wrote down his manuscripts, and so from there we have what they believed and what they did. We get most, I would say probably about 98% of the information that we have on Norse mythology and the Norse religion, Asatru, if you will, from the poetic and prose Eddas, which were written down by Snorri. I have to find this name, because if I mispronounce it, I'll be crucified. Snorri Sturluson. Yes, that is an actual name.
Well, you won't be crucified. You'll be with the flayed eagle or whatever it's called.
Blood eagle, yeah.
The blood eagle, yeah.
Or maybe I'll be hung in a tree for 9 days. We'll get there. So this guy, he was a historian in Iceland. He was also a bit of a diplomat. He had a very, very interesting life, but most of what we understand about Norse religion and Norse belief come from these two different books. The Prose Edda, which is mostly a history, first of all, sort of a historical account of where the gods came from. It has the creation story in it, etc. And then also, there's a lot of different things in the Prose Edda, including a number of stories of Danish kings, which are certainly mythological, at least in the beginning, and get more and more historical as you get closer to Snorri, because that's how we usually do history when it's ancient history. And then the Poetic Edda is more poetry, but still with sort of that historic mythological undertone to it. So just so that we're all aware, this is not from the people who actually worship these gods telling us from 2,000 years ago, here's what we did, here's what we thought, a la the Christian scriptures and stuff like that, where we have direct links to what did people believe and think.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. As I understand it, he wrote this in Iceland around 600 AD, now called Common Era CE. So those are synonymous terms. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I've listened to the Edda. I have also listened to Neil Gaiman's version of the Edda, which just came out, I think, within the last couple of years. It's called Norse Mythology, and I highly recommend it. It's very true to the Edda, but it's also put into modern language so that you don't have to try to parse out the poetry part, which I know is unacademic, but I'm not an academic, or at least my academic days are far behind me. So if you're like me, you're interested, but you don't want to have to try to understand what Shakespeare meant by struggling through the language and translating in your head. You just want to hear somebody who knows what they're talking about translated. I strongly recommend Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology, and on Audible. He performs it himself. He's actually pretty good at it.
Yes, I'll definitely second that. As somebody who has read both of the Eddas, if you don't want your head to hurt trying to figure out exactly what it means, just pick up Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, who I think is a wonderful author. He may be a little bit of a political kook, but we'll just completely ignore that. Definitely pick up his writings.
Great. I've enjoyed quite a few of his books, and people might be familiar with American Gods, but actually, American Gods has a heavy Norse element to it. And one of the things that I didn't know, shame on me, when you think of Norse mythology, you think of Norway, Scandinavia, but the Norse mythology is also largely Germanic, Northern European, Celtic, so the UK and Ireland, Scotland. A lot of the older religions are basically Norse, even into Russia. And I learned some of this from having Garden of Doom guests on who were talking about various parts of the world. And I didn't have a clue, even when I was watching sort of, stylized historical fiction shows, or whatever, but it sort of all of a sudden made sense why people depicted in, well, it wasn't England yet, but taking place in modern day England had hammer necklaces on and things of that nature. So, it's a very Northern European, spanning all the way into, maybe into the cusp of Asia and, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to see just how much, just how many of the different, cultures that we have in, overall Europe have little bits and pieces of what you call Viking or Norse histories to them too. I mean, the Anglo-Saxons, for instance, are called Anglo-Saxons because they come from the Angles and the Saxons, who were actually both Germanic tribes that came into Brittany at the time, and they conquered at different times, and even when the Vikings came, we've seen that quite a bit lately in a lot of popular culture, where the Vikings are invading England, and obviously the show Vikings is a very popular show. I know that there's recently been a very popular video game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which depicts the same kind of historical moment when the Vikings invaded England. But a lot of what they found when they got there was that there were very similar cultural ties. They had the Vikings had the thing, right, where people would come together, and that was sort of like their once a year major political gathering. And the people who were already there, the Angles, who were already there, had a very similar thing. They just called it a different name. And so something that you sort of see as you read like a lot of what was happening in England at the time, there were a lot of people going, well, these guys aren't really all that different from us, other than they believe in these big scary gods and they want to take our heads off, kind of thing.
Yeah, the second one probably be more important.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd be shocked at how important that first one was to a lot of people at the time. It was very much, oh, you believe in scary gods and we don't like you for it.
Fair enough. I mean, we still see that today. I still think it's the cutting of the heads part that at the end of the day scares people more.
I think that scares the average people more. I think politically we probably focus too much on, well, your gods aren't our gods, so therefore. But yeah, I think the average person just trying to farm their land cared a lot more about, please don't chop my head off.
Yeah. See, that's validation, folks. I am the average person.
There you go. Well, let's get into the creation story, because it is a bafflingly just hilarious and incredible. Most creation stories are, though. Most creation myths are, how would you say it? They're more about the symbolism, which may actually be lost to us, and we don't truly understand what the symbolism even represents anymore. I'm reminded of, like I grew up here in northwestern Ontario around the Ojibwe people, and the creation myth for them is that, the earth is the back of a turtle, right? So it's, where does that symbolism come from? What is it? It's all very deep. But okay, so let's get into the Norse creation story. In the beginning, there was nothing, right? We see this in most creation stories. There was nothing. There was darkness, a vast void that they called Ginningagap, if I'm pronouncing that right, which I may not be. If I'm not, I apologize. Ginningagap was the nothingness, essentially, and it divided into two major realms. In the north was Nephilim, which is the place of cold, where the only thing that existed was ice, snow, and fog. And Muspelheim is the hot place to the south, which is where the fire demons and such like that lives. There were several.
So even in nothing, there was something. So even in the nothingness, they were bordered by, one side is ice and cold and mist, which we get that, maybe that has nothing. But on the other side, we've got fire giants and demons that are sort of already existing. Yeah, exactly. There were things that sort of existed before things were created. So they're sort of the ancient ones in sort of Norse understanding, is that these things existed before anything was able to create anything. That's one of the really interesting things about a lot of pagan religions, well, frankly, monotheistic religions too, to a certain extent, is that there's a lot of parentage. There's something before. There were the Titans before the Greek gods, and there was something before the Titans. and it becomes a Russian nesting doll. But the same thing with Norse is that there were things before this set of gods.
Exactly, and even the MCU in the latest Thor movie had Surtur, who was an actual, that's an actual part of Norse myth, that there was a sort of a king of the fire demons called Surtur.
Yeah, there's
his goal was to bring about the end of everything.
It's also the part of all of our lives because it's Saturday.
Yeah.
Isn't Saturday named after Saturn? It's they're all Norse, aren't they? The days of the week.
The days of the week are Norse. We can definitely get into that a little. There's a little thing here that I have. So, yes, Saturday or Surtur's Day. The rough translation means hot water, basically indicating that it's time for a bath. It's time to take a bath. Of course, the Vikings were well known for. Recently, I've been reading some contemporary works from English authors during the time of not necessarily during the time of the invasions, but just slightly afterwards, where many British nobles and men were worried about how much their women wanted to sleep with the Norse, because, of course, the Norse brushed their hair and did strange things like washing once a week. So,
hey, listen, I guess in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, which actually is sort of appropriate to Norse, isn't it?
That's very appropriate for Norseism. But okay, let's go through the days of the week. We'll talk about it. Sunday is for Sol, the goddess of the sun, literally the sun's day. Monday for Mani, the goddess of the moon. Tuesday for Tyr, who was, among other things, a god of war. Wednesday, the reason, if you've ever wondered why Wednesday is spelt so weird, is because it actually is a translation from Woden's Day, which Woden was sort of the more Germanic pronunciation of Odin's name, was Woden. So if you've ever wondered why Wednesday is spelt so strange, it's because it's meant to be Woden's Day. Thor's Day, of course, sort of famously is for Thor, Thor's Day. Friday being Frigga or Frigg or Freya's Day. There's a lot of confusion about exactly which this is. Although it basically is sort of the day of renewal, the day of sort of starting over for the Norse people.
And then they take a bath.
Exactly. Interesting, as they've sort of dug up the bones of the Norse people who were buried, one of the things that people always comment on is that there's, brushes, and there's things to clean your ears, and there's things to clean your skin, and there's soaps, and there's, because cleanliness was a very important part of Norse culture, which to us nowadays sounds like a very funny thing, but when you think about, 1,300 years ago, this was a big deal, and it was very different from a lot of their contemporaries.
Yeah. I don't normally associate that kind of hygiene, that kind of strict regimen with Viking culture, but history tells us otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of funny, because we see two very different reactions to the Vikings in the English and in the Muslim world. A lot of English historians talk about how they were very clean and brushed their hair, etc. And in the Muslim world, we have not lots, but we have a few different writings about how barbaric and disgusting, and they were the dirtiest of all God's creatures, and etc., etc. So it's interesting to see, and just wonder: are these different people? Is that why, or does this have more to do with the different people in the different places placing importance on things like cleanliness? That's something that I've wondered about sometimes.
Well, I sort of, this is probably not the most scientific way of doing things, but I apply a lot of things to Game of Thrones, and so I sort of look at the difference between the people from Dorne and the Dornish people, and the people from like the north and the wildlands, and just sort of how they looked on average. So I think it is a prioritization, and maybe it makes sense that if you live in the desert and there's sand blowing all over the place and it's very dry and arid and hot a lot, that you just need to get a nice bath or shower or whatever, a nice cleansing. And maybe it's less important if one of your priorities is to stay warm 9 months out of the year and nighttime all through the year.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a good comparison, too, to be honest with you. The whole difference between the Dornish and the Norsemen in Game of Thrones, which, hey, if we're talking about really good books, those are good books.
They are good books.
Read those.
Yeah, except they end after 5,500 pages being no closer to conclusion than page 1. And so it's been, I don't know, 8 years or so, maybe longer, since the guy put out the last book. So I'm a little frustrated with that.
Yeah, George, come on, get on it now. This is ridiculous. But yeah, okay. So let's talk about giants and where the giants come from, because they play an important role in Norse mythology, specifically in creation. We're told that some of the lava from the south and some of the cold from the north met, and the ice melted and began to drip, and some of that started to take the form of humans, which were Jotun, also called giants. The first giant in Norse mythology, of course, was called Ymir, and from him, it's actually where we get the world, the earth which we live on. And so yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. Before we get to the forming of the earth, though, I wanted to point out something that I've always thought was sort of a hilarious story. There was a giant cow who existed at this time, which again is hilarious, because why is there a giant cow? But there's a giant cow, and it began to lick an ice block. And as it was licking the ice block, some hair emerged from the ice block, and then it continued to lick, and it basically licked this human-ish being out of the ice block, and that being was Buri, which was the first of the gods, and the I guess it would be grandfather of
Okay.
So yeah, that's where the first god came from. It was literally licked out of an ice block. So
By a giant cow that was just there.
It was just there. That's one of the things that I love about trying to parse out exactly what Norse mythology is talking about. When people say that's not really Norse, we don't really know what's really Norse. We don't.
Yeah.
We do not have enough information.
Right, and also another interesting thing is we don't know when Norse mythology stories when they started. We don't have a date to put on this.
No, exactly, we do not, and we'll actually get into that a little bit when we talk. If we do wind up talking about the war between the Aesir and the Vanir.
Try and stop us.
There's some very interesting theories about where that comes from. But let's continue with the creation of the world. So after Buri was Bor, which was the father of Odin, Vili, and Ve, which were sort of the original three, what's called Aesir, or the important gods to the planet. Yes. The giants, basically, they wanted to create a world, and they could only see one possibility, and that was to kill Ymir, the first giant, and then use what was left of him to create the world. And so, follow along here. The blood from Ymir became the oceans, rivers, and lakes. The flesh became the land. The bones became the mountains. The teeth were made into rocks. The hair became the grass and the trees. The eyelashes became Midgard. The brain was thrown up into the air, and it became the clouds. And the skull became the sky. So that is sort of the Norse creation story of the earth, that all things that we see, that we live in, were created from the dead and desiccated body of a giant named Ymir.
Take that, Big Bang Theory.
Yes, exactly.
Do better.
The whole universe was in a...
Do better, physicists.
Exactly. What do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's it. That's basically the creation myth from the Norse perspective.
That is an interesting creation myth. So my understanding is that Odin and his two brothers, were they Vili and V? Was that their names?
Yeah.
They were sort of wandering around on the beach where the bloody oceans met the fleshy sand, and walking around, and apparently some driftwood came up, and these three gods said, we should make some creatures that sort of look like us but aren't us. And like maybe they can populate this world and like do cool things like raise crops and animals and stuff like that, and it's probably useful for us. And Odin's like, yeah, okay, I'll start. So hey, there's that driftwood, and he turned it into sort of like almost like a marble statue of a human form. And then I guess he got bored or didn't really think the thing through, and was like, yeah, it's good enough. And he wanders off. And so one of his brothers goes, well, no, that's not good enough. We've got to do more. I mean, this thing can't do anything. And one of them infused, I guess, made it flesh and life, but still it couldn't do anything. And then the other one's like, you guys aren't even half-assing it. You're 1/3 assing it. And like the third brother infused it with like spirit and soul or sentience or whatever, which isn't all that different from God creating Adam from like a twig or dirt in Eden, something like that, and other myths too. Now I don't want to get too bogged down in comparative mythology because we'll never get to the war between the Aesir and the Vanir, or Ragnarok or any of those fantastic things, and we definitely have to. But I don't know. They then made a female, and if I'm not mistaken, I'd never remember the names, but their names start with an A and an E, just like Adam and Eve. And since we don't know when Norse mythology dates back to, but we do know that the Bible wasn't written 6,000 years ago. It started it probably, whenever the Israelites were in the Sinai Desert, and finished, roughly 400 AD. We don't know which came first. We don't, and we certainly don't know if there's any relationship to the A and E being part of it or not. But it just strikes me as a remarkable coincidence.
Well, certainly, and also this is where you have to sort of again remind yourself that what we have for information on this was written by somebody who had already lived through the Christianization of the Norse lands. Right, this guy was not born at a time when it was normal to worship Odin or Thor, or he was born into a time where most of his contemporaries believed in Christianity, yes, including the Bible, including Adam and Eve. So it's hard to know. It is one of those things though where with most ancient cultures you can point to a lot of similarities and things that people believed in. I mean, even the primary objective of a god like Thor, right, is very easy to point to other contemporaries of Thor, right? Because who is Thor? Well, he's the son of the king of the gods, right? And his primary objective is to save and protect humanity and the earth, right? I mean, that story sounds an awful lot like Hercules. It sounds an awful lot like Jesus. It sounds an awful lot like these stories sound an awful lot alike, where the son of the king of the gods has come to protect the earth and, will eventually sacrifice himself for all of us to survive, etc. So
Gilgamesh too, yeah. But except with the exception of Jesus, they're all sort of big, dumb, sort of good-natured but psychotic at the same time, and a little bit drunk. I don't know. Yeah, but it's true. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess. So we have like their version of Adam and Eve, who then go on to populate the earth with people. But at this point, I'm not exactly sure where the other gods come from, because we've got three brothers. I guess the Bor, is it, or Bor's son, creates some she gods as well, goddesses.
Yeah. Basically, what happens is the creation of the Vanir happens, where these are considered by the Norse. Like, again, this is very, very difficult to parse out, because a lot of it comes from poetry, things where you have to sort of look into symbolism anyway. But basically, we're told that they created a set of gods who were mostly, if not entirely, focused on fertility, and these were the Vanir. They were considered to be sort of, again, they're called the lesser gods by the Aesir. So it's sort of, are they actually lesser gods? Is there actually anything lesser about them? And of course, these gods go to war with the Vanir and the Aesir go to war with one another. And eventually what happens is they come to the conclusion that it would be best for everyone if they just all formed a pantheon and learned to sort of live together and figure out their differences. Now, one of the more interesting things about this, the most interesting theory that I've seen about this, is that this is actually sort of poetic language to describe something that actually happened, which is where, there were people in Europe, the very, very tribal people in Europe, who were worshiping these sorts of gods, these sorts of fertility gods, which we know to be true. Mm-hmm. From the ancient record, you can see a lot of pregnant women statues.
Absolutely.
So fertility gods were a very important thing to these sort of original European people. And as the more Celtic tribes started to move into places like Northern Europe, they worshipped more warlike gods, which are closer in temperament to the Aesir. And so people have sort of questioned if this thought of a war between the Aesir and the Vanir is actually more of like a historic record of the people's beliefs changing from the Vanir into a more Aesir type religions. And so it's a very interesting theory. Again, it's really hard to exactly parse out, but it sounds like something that could be true, and I think it sounds cool, so I choose to believe.
Well, that's a good one. Well, in true historic, feudal society methodology, they settled their differences or sealed their differences by having Odin marry Frigg, who was a Vanir, but then I guess lived among the Aesir in Asgard. I've always thought that the Vanir are not covered nearly as much as the Aesir, and like somebody could do like an interesting like Game of Thrones type show just on the Vanir.
Oh, I think it would be. I think there's so much interest. There's so much interesting potential in almost every bit of Norse religion for storytelling. I often will say, like, I know that for instance, like the MCU, we'll talk about that. It's quite a bit different than Norse religion, but sure. I still love the fact that they have a Thor character in the MCU. Obviously, as it's my people's sort of symbolic god of strength, god of war. And there's been a lot of talk about how the plan for the next Thor movie is that, a woman is going to become Thor, and et cetera, et cetera. And I always think that that's such a waste of really good potential storytelling, because I would love to see, for instance, an MCU movie about Freya. Why not have a different Norse god who is female become the character, rather than taking something away from a character that already exists? But that's probably a podcast for a different day.
That's all right. Listen, I've got weeks until eternity, as do you. So plenty of time for content and sort of fan fiction podcasting.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, and in the end, there's a good question to ask. most of what we know about Norse religion, the Norse beliefs, it might be a lot of fan fiction. That might be exactly what we're reading as we read the poetic and prose edits.
That's a thing with oral history. Then again, I mean, a lot of the First Nations, people and indigenous peoples around the world swear that their oral history is just as immutable as the Torah is to the Jewish people, the Quran is to the Muslim people. So listen, I have no way of knowing it, so we won't settle that today, nor are we going to even try. But we do know that Odin and Frigg got married, thus ending or sealing the end of the war between the Vanir and the Aesir, and I guess they lived more or less happily ever after. And some of the more famous gods were the offspring of this union.
Absolutely. Again, so I mean, we can talk about Thor, who is the the most popular of Norse gods. Definitely, he's become his own superhero. But even outside of that, he's the one that people sort of point to and know of. And the reason why is because he was the most popular at the time as well. The Norse people, they supplicated their gods, they prayed to their gods, they sacrificed to their gods, and they asked their gods for favors. It was considered dangerous to do that with some of them because they were either unknowable or they were so much smarter than us that they would give us things that we didn't want to help us. Praying to Odin, for instance, was considered to be kind of a flip of a coin because he might give you what you want and he might, come steal your eyeball or something. That was, the thing with Odin. The god, though, that seemed to be supplicated to the most and who we actually have, real historical record of people wearing his symbols or talking about him in the things and those kinds of situations is Thor. And one of the main reasons for it is sort of something that you mentioned. He seems to be kind of a stupid character. He kind of seems to be a bit of an everyman, almost like Homer Simpson with superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
But that appealed to the Viking people, that appealed to the Norse people because he was simple and he would answer you or help you in very simple ways. I've even seen some theories floated around there that the idea of him being kind of this stupid everyman might have been not quite canonical beliefs that were shared with people as sort of a, look, everybody screws up. Even Thor can be an idiot sometimes, kind of stories. So when you see a lot of things where he's being idiotic or drinking oceans or, mating with horses and weird, odd things that Thor is sometimes, accused of doing.
Well, he got that from his dad. I mean, his dad's going all over the place being horrible.
I mean, and this is sort of an interesting thing about like most of these King of the Gods types. They have this reputation for being not great. I mean, Zeus is sort of famously kind of a rapist in Greek mythology.
Serial rapist. I guess in our culture he'd have a reasonable doubt because the woman would be like, yeah, it was a swan, it was a goat, it was a goose. I mean, I remember, this is a stupid little Jeff story, but I can't imagine the other teenage boys weren't the same way, thinking, oh my God, I can't get a girl to go with me to the junior prom, but there are women here sleeping with goats and swans. What's wrong with me?
Sure. Where are Lot's daughters? Because I need a date.
Yeah, if only I was a goat, then I could get a date.
Yeah, exactly. Well, or even the God of the Old Testament. You read that book, and I mean, that doesn't exactly sound like happy-go-lucky, get on the bus Jesus. That the God of the Old Testament is very vengeful, very full of wrath and anger.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yes, indeed. That is true.
And so, so one thing that I definitely think probably has some basis, some merit, is the idea of sort of Thor as the everyman, kind of being an idiot, kind of being a drunkard, kind of being a person who's easy to fool. We'll put it that way, as he's fooled multiple times by Loki. That a lot of that may have come from the fact that he was so beloved, and that the Norse people created a lot of these stories to sort of say, look, even our superhero can sometimes make mistakes.
Right, that was sort of the balance. Him and Loki were always played off each other, and Loki was the conniving one. But Thor usually got the better of Loki in the end. So, as dumb as Thor was, he really wasn't that dumb. I mean, it's just that Loki was that conniving. And also Thor was strong enough that he could overcome the deficit brain. So in this case, the pen was not necessarily mightier than the sword, or the mind was not necessarily mightier than the giant hammer.
Certainly, sometimes in Norse mythology, might makes right. And I hate saying that, but that's sort of something you can parse out from a lot of Norse mythology. If you're strong enough to get over it, you can get over it.
That's right. So I think that I'm not sure if I skipped ahead or not, but we have Odin was born with two eyes and at some point lost one eye. And I'm not sure if that's sort of at the beginning of the story, or if this is after the war with the Vanir or before the war with the Vanir.
It is after the war with the Vanir that Odin begins to crave more knowledge. Not necessarily just more knowledge. He wants all the knowledge. He wants to know all of everything. And so he begins to seek out knowledge. He begins to seek out understanding. And there's the famous story of Odin basically going to the three sisters of fate at the well and saying, like, you are very knowledgeable, you know all, how can I gain your knowledge? He's told that he has to sacrifice an eye, something that he very willingly does. And then he hangs on the tree for 9 days and 9 nights. Again, we start to get into a lot of, like, how much of this is actually part of the myth, the original thought of the Norse people, and how much of this is someone trying to introduce some of Christianity into this story. The whole idea of hanging on a tree for X number of days.
That's true.
But anyway, that's
or vice versa.
He hung on.
But there's also
exactly. It may be.
But there's also the 9 realms, right? There's the 9 worlds in Asgard, and the 3. What are they called? The Norns, right? The wise women.
The Norns, yeah. The wise women.
So we have the 3 wise men, the Magi, but also aren't the Stygian witches? Aren't there also 3 of them in Greek?
Yep, exactly. There's so many interesting parallels between those specific, with all, I think, cultures. You can find many parallels, but the parallels between the ancient Judeo-Christianity, Norse beliefs, and the ancient Greek mythology, there are so many connecting tissues with those 3 different belief systems that if you've spent any time really, really learning any of them, you start to see things where you're like, hey, wait a minute, didn't I just read that over here, kind of thing?
Yeah,
And
I think there were also 9 major gods in the Norse panoply, 9 major gods in the Greek panoply, 9 major gods in the Egyptian panoply. But I think, and I might be wrong about this, but I think that there's 9 major archangel Elohim in the Bible.
Yeah.
And of course, there's 9 ring wraiths in Lord of the Rings. Perhaps the most important.
That's definitely the most important. I happen to be, I'm a single dad, right? I happen to have a weekend to myself. This is my first weekend to myself in quite a while. So what am I doing? I'm watching Lord of the Rings. I bought the HD extended versions because, how can you make 3-hour movies better? Just make them longer, right?
Of course.
So that's what I've been doing this weekend.
I'd love to criticize you, except I just rewatched Game of Thrones. So, so I can't. I've spent, something like 80 hours.
There you go. And hey, the rules of the Game of Thrones are simple. Either you win or you die.
So it would seem, right to the end. I even watched the whole thing knowing how unsatisfying the end was.
Right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, it might be interesting to sort of talk about Ragnarok. I know that that's something that a lot of people are interested in, obviously. It's something that we as a species are very interested in. The end of the world is not very far from our collective imaginations ever, and it never seems to have been very far. And so the idea of Ragnarok, one of the things that I find fascinating about it is when you read in the Eddas, it seems as if this is a thing that has already happened, almost as if it suggests that we are living in sort of the already post-apocalyptic reality, where the gods are already dead. And yet, as you read the Poetic Edda, a lot of that sort of suggests that it's going to happen. And so is it cyclical? Is it one of these things that has happened and will happen? Or is this just, how do you translate, Old Norse into English and things like that? But, the idea of the end of the world. Again, it's one of those fascinating things that throughout human history, it's something that we're obsessive over. Even today, you can see it in contemporary literature. You can see it, not even literature, you can see it in contemporary culture. People really, truly believe that the world's going to end in 8 years because of climate change. Or people, 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, were obsessing about the fact that the Mayan calendar ends. And before that, it was, it's 6606, or the Y2K bug, etc. All of these things, it's a strange obsession that we as a species have with the end. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're going to die. Mm-hmm. And so we have this imagination in our heads that all things are going to end because we end, and maybe we'll be here. Maybe we're special enough that we'll be here for it. Always kind of a silly thought, in my opinion, but there it is.
Well, odd Ragnarok. So we have Loki, who was not a son of Odin. He was a son of a frost giant, right, from Jotunheim. And who's the mother or the father?
Difficult to sort of parse out. Let me just see if I've got it in my notes, because I do have a bunch of things written down. But
And I know Ragnarok sort of started when Baltar, not Baldar, or maybe I have that backwards, who's Baldar the Brave, the shiny one, the light one, was killed by a trick that Loki perpetrated, and I guess got him banished. And Loki, through his meanderings and his fornications, managed to give birth to a giant wolf and some other creatures. And it's almost like they kept Lex Luthor at Asgard, but Lex Luthor would go out and was building the Legion of Doom outside, and it's like all of the gods had their like arch enemy. So to go out in like true Batman and Joker fashion, they'd have to sort of fight forever until the end.
Right. No, that's funny. And yeah, okay. So the parents of Loki, I sort of found this in my notes. I'm sorry. The father is Bauti, which is a Jotun, and Laufey, who's mentioned as a goddess, but is also kind of mentioned as a frost giant. So, again, this is sort of the problem that we have with Norse mythology being a little bit jumbled, but something of a frost goddess was his mother.
Well, listen, Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine and 1/3 witch human. So, hey, how different is that? Now, Gilgamesh was more of a Thor character than a Loki character, but, the point still applies. You flip a coin, and one comes out conniving, the other one comes out big and, egomaniacal.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the whole thing with Loki and his sort of, he's constantly scheming, right? And I love the way that you can sort of read it is like, Loki is there, and he's constantly coming up with different ways to try to take over the world and trying to, gain power and control over everyone. And yet, it seems like, the rest of the gods, their reaction to him is to sort of muss his hair and be like, you little scamp. This guy's trying to kill you, and your reaction is, oh, Loki.
Well, he created a lot of problems, but he also creates the solutions to most of his problems, mostly because he's afraid they're going to kill him. But it's like, he's Dennis the Menace, but he's our Dennis the Menace. Yeah, he says he's going to kill us one day. Yes, that's what the prophecy says, but don't worry about that later. We're gods.
Yeah, exactly. It's very funny as you read it. That's definitely the sort of feeling that you get from it is like, why aren't these people taking this seriously?
I mean, even when Tyr loses his hand, he's like, I like the big wolf.
Yeah, exactly. Tyr and Fenrir are very interesting characters too, and they play a part in the Ragnarok as well. Fenrir being the giant wolf, sort of the king of all the wolves, who is also Loki's son. Which, listen, if you're uncomfortable with bestiality, maybe don't read anything about Loki. It's he seems to have a thing for the animals. But Fenrir is his son, the giant wolf, who is sort of the king of all the wolves. And the stories are kind of interesting about Fenrir. Odin knew that a giant wolf would be his end. That was sort of prophesied. And so when Fenrir became a thing, the gods were very, very worried about him, and they decided that they would raise him themselves, that they would sort of keep him as a pet. And they tried to chain him, right, the same way that we try to chain a dog. And at first they put a chain of solid steel around him, and he broke it easily. And then they thought, well, we'll make maybe gold. And they made a chain of gold, and he broke that one easily too. The story tells us that eventually Odin went to the dwarves, who were the master craftsmen, according to Norse mythology.
Who also were created by who created the dwarves? We never. They just exist.
Again, one of those things where just all of a sudden there's dwarves in this story. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing against dwarves. I'm pro dwarves. I know Peter Dinklage right now isn't happy with dwarves being portrayed as living in caves and whatever, but that is sort of the story of Peter, come on. I mean, there's stories about dwarves, and then there's there's humans who have dwarvism. We can tell the difference. We can make that distinction. But anyway, Peter's probably not listening anyway, and if he is, he's about to cancel me anyway, which is probably the best thing that would happen to my career. So,
honestly,
love your work, Peter. Love it.
Love the work of Peter Dinklage. Absolutely fantastic. But yes. There's a difference between dwarfs in Norse mythology and people who have dwarfism.
Yes.
Yes. Unless there isn't, and they're just secretly really good at building things, but they've all gotten lazy in the last few hundred years. Which, I mean, I wouldn't want to be sitting at a forge either if I didn't have to be. But anyway, Odin goes to the dwarves, and he says, "Can you build me a chain that will hold this wolf?" So they say, "Sure, we'll build you this chain." So it's a very small, slight chain, right? And when they go to chain up Fenrir with it, the wolf, he's, again, I mean, he can talk because all things can talk and explain themselves in ancient myths. He's very worried about it. He says, I'm not going to do it unless one of you puts your hand in my mouth as, sort of the hostage if there's something wrong with this chain. So they wrap the chain around him. It does hold him. He gets angry. He bites off Tyr's hand, who was the only one who was brave enough to put his hand in the mouth. And Tyr's reaction is, I kind of like hooks, and this is a good little pet. Let him live with me.
He told me he was a wolf all along. Now, I'm still mystified as to what positive reaction did he think he was going to get from a chain after his prior reactions. But I'm also wondering why the dwarves were supplicant to the gods when they can build stuff beyond the capability of the gods. So that I don't expect you to cure that confusion either. I guess it's just one of those things that is, or maybe they were just, maybe they're savants. They were lazy in all ways except for building things.
Yeah, exactly. Which is definitely an idea that will piss off Peter Dinklage, even though we're not talking about your kind of dwarves.
We are definitely not. We are absolutely not. We're just talking about from these stories, which are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old, and that we're just reciting tales. We're just trying to interpret them. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Hel also one of Loki's offspring, not Odin's offspring, not Thor's sister? Or do I have that wrong?
No. So Hel is considered to be one of the children of Loki. She's said to preside over the underworld. Obviously, her name being Hel. She is referred to as a daughter of Loki, although it's less clear about how he created Hel than it is about some of the other things. Again, we have multiple stories about Loki and horses and wolves and stuff, but there's less specific about Hel, or sometimes referred to as Hela. But essentially, she's this being who eventually takes over in the underworld and watches over the dead.
And she definitely didn't look like Cate Blanchett in the mythology or in the stories. Half of her body and face is, sort of like the epitome of beauty, but the other half is sort of like, I sort of picture like almost like zombie-ish, like sort of petrified, sort of fleshiated, death. Half is dead.
Yeah. Exactly. And Hel is an interesting character in Norse mythology. Again, the parallels with the Greek and what I would say the early interpretations of Judeo-Christian understandings of the underworld god, right? This figure is a very common thing in European culture, the underworld god. And like those other gods, they're considered to be very much twofold, right? And she's even considered to be twofold in her literal, like, physical being, that she is half beautiful and half hideous.
Sort of like a Two-Face from Batman, except in female form.
Yeah, very much like that. And very much like Two-Face, she has two sides to her. Partly she's there to help sort of watch after our dead, right? The dead people who go there. And so she's seen as this character who's very much of two minds of things, because she also will punish the wicked who die, right? But she's also there to be sort of a gatekeeper or a watcher of those who die. The same way that, in the ancient Greek tradition, Hades is not a villain. He's considered to be this twofold character where, yes, he has to visit wrath upon those evil and wicked, but also he's there to sort of watch out for your grandma. Do you know what I mean? Like,
the king of the underworld. The underworld is not hell. It's not where the punished go. It's where all the dead, and in Norse, it's where all the dead who are not remarkable, who didn't die valiantly in battle, go. That's Valhalla. That's for the warriors who died properly, the heroes, whatever. The Valkyrie are not actually female dead, as I understand it. They're sort of like a semi deity type creature to begin with. I guess one of those is just sort of popped out of Odin's mind. By the way, what happened to Odin's parents? What happened to Odin's father? Was it like the Titanoctomy where they declare war on them and chop them up too, or did they just sort of go off into the yonder?
It's one of those things that's very hard to parse out, because there's not a lot of information about where they went. Just like Billy and V, there's a lot of what happened to those guys?
Yeah, that's true. Also, when I read Ragnarok, I was surprised. I thought it was the end. I thought everyone died. But it turns out everyone didn't die, including two brothers of Thor. I didn't even know he had two brothers. They were barely ever named. And they also had names like Billy and it's like Vilni and like Vali, so something like that. At one point I had it written down because I'm like, if I get two giant dogs, I'm going to name them after Thor's brothers. And it's one of those dopey ideas.
Yeah. Do you mean Thor's brothers or Thor's sons?
It very well could be sons.
Right, because his sons were, Modi and Magni.
Okay.
And they are said to, they're characters who are said to have survived, or they will survive. Again, it's very, very confusing as to whether or not this is something that has happened or will happen or is currently happening. But yeah. Magni and Modi.
Those are them.
His sons who are said to survive Ragnarok.
Yeah, those are the dudes those are the dudes I saw, officer.
Yeah. Great names too for dogs, absolutely. Modi and Magni. There's lots of like double names in Norse mythology that are really cool. You know, Hunin and Munin, of course, are sort of the famous the ravens of Odin, who represent. It's not this simple. Obviously, the words in Old Norse don't translate perfectly, but they essentially translate to memory and thought.
Well, that's cool. It's better than Heckle and Jekyll.
Yeah. Batman and Robin, I guess. There's lots of those dynamic duos in history, but that's something that you notice a lot of in Norse, in the Norse tradition. There's a lot of doubles. There's a lot of duos.
Duality. I mean, the Vanir, the Aesir. I mean, lots of cultures have the duality, the masculine and the feminine. Yeah, we get all Laotian. We can get all of that.
Absolutely. So the sort of end of Ragnarok, or the highlight of Ragnarok, we are told that Odin will die battling Fenrir, or he has died. Again, it's hard to sort of tell exactly where that's going. And sort of the climax, the main event is between the world serpent Jormungur, who is a snake so large that it either has or will coiled itself around the earth and then swallowed its tail, which again is it's something that it's a symbolism that's come out a lot more in the last, I would say, 5 or 10 years. This has become a lot more popular, a symbol, even in a lot of like different stories that don't have anything to do with Norse mythology. That symbol of the what is the term? Ouroboros?
Ouroboros. I've got one on my back circling the Tree of Life, Yggdrasil.
Oh, well, that's cool. I did not know that you had that.
Hurt like hell, because right at the base of my neck over that top vertebrae, I don't know why I didn't know that, but it never occurred to me that would hurt so badly.
That is a very sensitive spot. I've heard that.
Yeah, and it's not like it was like people out there. Well, you should have spoken to people who got tattoos before. I'm like, that was my 11th tattoo. I mean, it's not like I was new to the game. I guess I just never had one directly on a bone.
Right. Yeah. No, that hurts. The other thing is the baby skin. Like, I know my dad has an Aboriginal symbol, sort of as like a wrapped around his bicep. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there next to him when he was getting it done. I have a cross on my arm from when I was like 14 and still believed in, hardcore sort of Christianity. And we got tattooed together when I was 14. And I was sitting there just sort of patiently getting tattooed. It hurt, but it wasn't bad because it's up on sort of that meaty part of my shoulder. Yeah. And my dad was getting tattooed next to me, and he was the whole time. And I was kind of looking over at him like, geez, you're a wimp. But no, it's just the different parts of your skin. But yeah. Okay, so the battle between Jormungur and Thor. They will battle. Thor will defeat the creature. He will save the world. Again, this is sort of it harkens back to the Jesus symbolism, or maybe Jesus harkens back to the symbolism of Thor. And he will defeat the serpent, and then he will take 3 steps, and he will fall down dead from the venom. 3 steps, 3 days, etc., etc. There's a lot of that connective tissue, but that'll be sort of that will be or was the main event of Ragnarok. Thor defeating Jormungandr, saving the world, and then his sons Modi and Magni will take up his hammer, or have taken up his hammer, and either will or have continued to push the world forward.
With maybe a new batch of gods. Maybe Ragnarok did happen just in different ways to all these other, I'll just call them generations of proto-gods and proto-proto-gods and proto-proto-titans and whatever it is. But somebody should do a story on, I'm always volunteering somebody, but somebody should do a story on Modi and Magni and their little adventures. What did they end up doing?
Oh, I agree. I think that they would be an incredible source of, there's so many really interesting sources. And again, there's so much possibility to go with, because the Poetic and Prose Eddas do not give us like years and years of backstory the way that a character, like, for instance, if you're going to make a Batman about Bruce Wayne, you have to take into account certain things that have happened in his history, right? Mm-hmm. He's got years and years of backstory. But these characters like Modi or Magni or Freya, they're all considered to be warriors, first of all, right? Which is an interesting, thing to start with if you're going to be creating stories. And then they're interesting, right? Because the backstories that we do have is like, okay, Modi and Magni are the sons of Thor. What the hell is that like?
Yeah. It's got to be a lot to live up to. But yeah, there's as I understand it, the ice giants or the frost giants and the fire giants died in Ragnarok. They were on the bad guy team. The Asgardians died as well, but there's no mention of the Vanir other than Frigg or Freya. There's no mention of the dwarves, who I guess were sitting there and happily in their caves doing whatever. I think that there are. I don't know if the battle was so tumultuous it destroyed everything. But Magni and Modi survived, but they're gods. But I don't know. The Vanir were gods too, so there's still something wandering around on this earth, and that seems like it's fertile ground to pick it up. I understand why nobody picked it up in 601 AD, because they would have been
killed by the Catholic Church.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm not even sure it was Catholic yet, but just the Church. I don't know. That sounds like fun. Who's somebody who's got some storytelling skills, who isn't me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd read it.
Yeah.
Or watch it, or listen to it.
Absolutely. No, actually, it's a thing that it inspired me a little bit. I have all, you know me well enough. I don't know if the listeners know me well enough, but I do love to tell stories, and most of what I do is I come up with really, really interesting ideas, and I'll write about 3 or 4 chapters, and then I'll get bored and go on to something else. But I have had an idea for Modi and Magni characters in one of my fiction that I think would be kind of fun to tell.
Excellent, good. Well, I look forward to that. That sounds amazing. I'm still working on my vampire book. So, which has a beginning and sort of an end, but absolutely no middle. So,
right. So it's like AEW booking.
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah. It's and by no middle, I'm being very generous with the term. Liberal is like Stretch Armstrong. That is. So yeah, there's that. So guys, don't look forward to me writing any books anytime soon. It's probably just going to be, it'll be an oral tradition. Maybe I'll tell the story at some point. Maybe here. Who knows? Okay. So also with Norse, what did we leave out? What's important that we forgot? I don't know how important it is, but Odin had that spear that never missed, and that's what killed Fenrir, even though Odin threw it while riding his, I think his 8-legged horse, which I think was also one of Loki's kids, right into Fenrir's mouth. So Fenrir killed his step-grandfather and I guess his brother at the same time.
Yeah, there's a lot. So there's a lot, obviously. We don't have time to cover all of Norse mythology, but other important things I would say would be, if you want to read some of the stories, just just reading some of the stories in the prose and poetic Edda, they are very interesting. If nothing else, yeah, you get to read about some very, very neat things, like a spear that never misses, and a hammer that spouts lightning, and an 8-legged horse, and a serpent long enough to encircle the entire planet, etc. So one of the things that I think is probably worth mentioning is a lot of these ideas about the things, the weapons specifically. A lot of people have picked up on this and sort of wondered about the possibility of them being alien technology, and about this whole tradition of the king of the gods and all of this being, the ancient aliens idea. Because what would you call it if you saw a spaceship and it had 8, points to it? What would you think that was, right? What would you even call that? Or if you saw somebody who had a lightning ray, what would you even call that? Or if you saw somebody who had some kind of a spear that you could throw and it would come back to you, what would you call that? How would you interpret that, especially as an ancient human being? And so it's worth mentioning, I think, that those things are worth looking into. If you want to, read into that, I would suggest looking at things like Ancient Aliens. There's a lot of really cool possibilities as to where these stories come from.
Or listen to Garden of Doom and all of the back episodes, because probably every other episode at least touches on that, if not gets obsessive about it. But yeah, Ancient Aliens and Gaia and Earth Ancients. But an interesting thing, actually something historic, which might give us some idea as to the dateline, the timeline as to when Norse mythology actually has its origins, came to me by J.P. Bristow, who's the host of The History of the People of the Russian Empire. So I always get the name wrong, but it's The History of the Russian Empire, and he starts with prehistory. And he was a guest on the show and a few episodes ago, and I have the name of his podcast right as the title of the show. So apologies, but it's there. Anyway, and he covered this, that the Scythians, and he does pronounce it Scythians, are the peoples that invented the chariot. Well, Thor used a chariot that was hauled by goats. So if a chariot was invented by the Scythians, and we generally know, at least as when the Scythians sort of emerged as a people, that will give you an idea as to no later than Thor and the Norse mythology arising. Then again, possibly somebody else imagined a chariot and never built one. So, I think a lot of times when we look at the ancients, we eliminate the possibility that they had imaginations then, like we do now. And, people who make Star Trek and Star Wars, that doesn't mean that there's ships like the Enterprise or the Millennium Falcon flying around. We imagined it. And Superman doesn't mean that there's meta humans out there. We imagined him, and quite possibly they had imaginations as well. Theirs were just as we have more science and stuff, we the things that are available to us in the quote unquote real world allows our imagination to get that much bigger. But I don't know. The whole basis of this show is doing speculation and comparative cultural. Myths, legends, lore, history, and seeing those things. So I don't dismiss it at all. I love it. I eat it up, but I also can't ignore that, we're sort of being disingenuous to the people of our past and what their brains were capable of.
Oh, certainly. I mean, there's a question of who invented flight. Was it the Wright brothers or was it Socrates?
Ooh. Yeah, there actually is another former guest of this show, Sebastian Major, whose podcast is Our Fake History. Cheap plug, episode.
Oh, I love that show.
Me too. And he was on Garden of Doom, and that episode is called Our Fake History, which, by the way, we talked about the Templars. We talked about who each of us thought was the most important person in history and some other fun stuff as well. but how did I get on? Oh, he did a show on the who's really first in flight, and there's some controversy. There might have been a Brazilian guy who was first in flight. There might have been a French fella, and obviously we know the machines designed by Da Vinci, and then as you pointed out, Socrates, and who knows who else came up with ideas and what functioned and didn't function. I mean, Icarus did fly for a while. He just flew too high. Which is anybody who knows me on Twitter, my handle is at Icarus Fell, MD. Yeah, MD from Maryland, but Icarus Fell. Because, at the time I came up with my Twitter handle, that's sort of what happened to me. And like Icarus, it was mostly my own damn fault. So, so there you go. But that is a story for another day and definitely not for the world to consume. We'll see. Unimportant. So yeah. Oh yeah, Norse mythology. I see, the good thing about having Chris on the show when I see him is that right now he actually looks like a Viking. Right down to his hairdo. He looks like he'd be an MMA fighter any day now. So I can get myself back on track. So yeah, Norse mythology. What do we leave out? Any recaps? Any sources or places that you recommend for people who are interested in the stories? I mean, other than the Eddas themselves and the Neil Gaiman's version, Norse mythology, anything else that you would recommend as sort of something that they could easily consume that would give them nice flavor?
Yeah, watch the show Vikings. Although it's not a historical, document by any stretch of the imagination, it does get into quite a few of the more interesting parts of Viking life. Some things that are worth a couple of things that are worth mentioning, I think, before we close are some of the things that the Norse people, how they lived. A few things that are very interesting to people today is things like the rights of women in Norse culture, comparative to other women in Europe at the time. They had an incredible amount of freedom. They were allowed to own property. They were allowed to ask for a divorce. They were allowed to fight. They were allowed to build ships. They were allowed to run settlements. They were allowed to do a lot of things that a lot of women at the time weren't allowed to do, and were often considered to be at least somewhat magical by the Norse people. They thought that all women were kind of magic, which
I agree with that.
You consider creating life magical.
I agree. All people are magical in their own way, but I mean, my woman is definitely magical. Yeah, no, I've definitely seen the magic of women in the past, so I understand it. Also, the sort of rebirth of Asatru, I think, is an interesting thing to sort of think about too. That this is a belief system that was essentially dead for a very long time, and it is starting to come back. Now, I know that it is sometimes sort of attached with people with really awful beliefs in prison, we'll put it that way. But there are a lot of just regular good people who find it very fascinating or interesting, or find some kind of a spiritual connection with the idea of the ancient Norse pantheon. And I think that it's at least worth mentioning that it's growing quite a bit, and quite a bit faster than I think you might have guessed 20 years ago. They've just recently rebuilt a temple, I know, in Sweden, and I know that in Finland and in Germany, they're actually building temples to Asatru and to the worship of the Norse gods again. So maybe this is just one of those all things are cyclical ideas, but I find it fascinating that it's making a bit of a comeback. Well, it sure is. And it does sound like everything that's old is new again. I echo your recommendation of Vikings, and if nothing else, there's supposed to be a spin-off coming out at some point that takes place mostly in Iceland and then going into the Americas. Also a show called The Last Kingdom, I think it's called. It's on Netflix now. It's from the Saxon point of view in well, it's not England yet, it's the English kingdoms, but a lot of it has to do with the Danish and other Norse peoples' invasions. And some of the history of it intersects with Vikings. And the thing is about Vikings, it's definitely not historic, but it is historical fiction. Ragnar was real, his son Bjorn was real, Ivar the Boneless was real, Rollo was real, and Rollo became a French hero as well. A lot of the major characters were real. Now, did they do what they do in the show? And then, there's a little magic in it as well, sort of, not quite to a Game of Thrones level, but, certainly more than the Last Kingdom kind of level. But yeah, it's a fun show, but I'd recommend those two. And then for us pop culture people in the here and now, we can't really, we talked about it a little bit, but the MCU. Where did they really diverge from, let's just call it canon, just because we don't need to keep qualifying, the Edda and all that. I mean, obviously they turned the Asgardians into aliens. There were the 9 worlds, but these were other planets, which I guess, the Asgardians were, in the MCU, are aware of more than 9 planets, but I guess their dominion was only for these particular 9. Hel was, Odin's first daughter, and she wasn't too pleased about her situation, I guess, being down there. I think they did a pretty good job with the fire giants, though they only really paid attention to one. They did the frost giants, They did the frost giants okay, but they didn't really spend any time on other giants. And ironically, they made Peter Dinklage a dwarf in space with a forge, but he was a enormous giant, so I guess they made him happy with that. I don't know if that was his idea or their idea. That always struck me as a little bit odd, the whole thing, but I don't know. I mean, it's funny. In Guardians of the Galaxy, there was this whole, universe of worlds inside a giant's skull floating in space. There was the mining colony in there, so, the MCU borrowed a lot from Norse as well. I'm trying to think of where else they went terribly wrong or terribly right.
I think that they got Thor's general, his general attitude quite right, in that, he's noble, he wants to do the right thing, he's also a bit of a dumbass, but he's the dumbass where, he's stupid, but you love him. He's that lovable idiot again, a la Homer Simpson.
They made him really good looking, though. I think the Thor in the mythology isn't. I mean, maybe he's ruggedly good looking, but if he wasn't so big and strong, I don't think he's handsome by any stretch. It's also not blonde.
He's a big redhead.
Yeah,
he's a big redhead in mythology. So
big ginger.
And he hangs out with goats all the time. Yeah. So I don't know. There's certain things that they missed from it. But again, I think that they did a good job with the Loki character. I think that that's spot on in terms of how he acts, in that he always seems like he's trying to take over the world, he's trying to take over things, but he's also doing it out of a sense of kind of feeling small in general. So I loved that. I thought that they got the characterization pretty right in the MCU. I don't know if they did it so well in the comics, but in the MCU, I actually think that they did a better job.
Yeah, no, in the comics, it's definitely not that, or at least my recollection, which is probably 40 years old at this point. But yeah, they didn't cover a lot of the other gods. There's no mention of really much attention to Baldar or Tyr. I mean, they gave Heimdall a lot. They sort of had the 4 friends. Falstaff, I think, was one's name, and then there was the Robin Hood guy and the
Warriors 3, Sith and the Warriors 3.
Now, was Sith in the mythology Thor's wife, or?
Yes.
Okay, she was absolutely his wife. Okay, yeah. Well, they obviously strayed from that in the comics. Thor fell in love with a mortal woman, so a little bit different there. Obviously, I'm trying to think of anything else, but I mean, I wouldn't look to the MCU as canon on Norse. I would just look to Norse as some backdrop for it, but just enjoy the ride of the MCU for what it is. Which I think is wonderful. I think it's one of the greatest achievements in filmmaking of all time. If nothing else, then there's 20-something films that are tied together more or less seamlessly, and it seems to have no end in sight, including TV series and whatever. So, that kind of organization and logistics is, monumental. Just that is a stunning achievement. I mean, try to watch all the James Bond movies, and there's no continuity there, and they really only barely try to do it. So anyway, enough on the MCU and my unabashed love for the MCU, because I also have unabashed love for Norse mythology, but I didn't know as much as the particulars as I thought I did, and that's why we had Chris here as our expert. I can't thank you enough for joining me. Thank you for sharing some of your single Sunday where you could be watching the Hobbit trilogy right now.
No, I won't do that.
Okay.
I will not. No.
Good, you did. That's where things end for you. That's, yeah.
There are certain, I can love a thing and know when to let it die. The Hobbit was fine. I watched the movies when they came out. I'm not going to rewatch those movies. The same way that I love the MCU up to Phase 4, and at that point, I have a really hard time with basically everything. Not because I dislike them on an active level, but just because a lot of it's really boring. A lot of it, I used to be a comic fan, and so they covered a lot of the main stories. And I mean, the new Spider-Man movie was great. Don't get me wrong. I'm expecting the new Doctor Strange movie to be really great too. But a lot of the rest of that was just I don't need to see Simu and the Ten Rings. I don't need to see the Eternals. Don't really interest me. It's not really. It's interesting. The concept is interesting, but I felt like it really was not done very well. So I don't know.
Well, that's because the concept was really interesting, and it wasn't done very well. So you got that one almost exactly right, if not exactly right. Yeah. I was very disappointed in the Eternals. Not when I watched it. I mean, I enjoyed it enough when I watched it. I realized I wasn't watching a great movie, but it just reminds me of so many things. Again from our various histories and mythologies and stuff like that. I mean, they basically spent 2.5 hours telling the world God isn't real and wondering why it didn't make $1 billion. So, maybe it was a little bit too close to home for a lot of viewers, or maybe it just wasn't that great. And, both are possible actually, or both might be contributing factors. But yeah, I can see why you would be sort of burnt out on the MCU. I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot of difference between, and this is not just the MCU, but there wasn't a whole lot of difference between some of the Thor movies, Black Panther, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Jason and the Argonauts. I mean, after a while, all the stories sort of are the same, but and that's the nice thing. You don't have to like it all, and and you can watch them at your leisure when they come on your cable system and whatever it is. But yeah, for me, it's fun. It's easy. It's just easy to just sit there and look forward to something and not have to think too hard, because there's plenty of other things I have to think hard about. And I think that's probably a good time for the audience to stop thinking and to check out. Again, Chris, I thank you very much. I can't wait for the show where we get into Mormonism, and then from there we'll actively think about what our next show is on this. And Chris and I are working on another project, and sometimes our paths cross in the universe known as the PWC, and every now and then on the @Mark, and even on rarer occasions you'll find me and him crossing paths on the Hameen Media Group from time to time. So if you think you've heard this combination before outside the Garden of Doom, you have. If you want to hear more of it, or if you hate it so much that you want to throw things at your own ears, you can listen to the Question of Indigeny episode, the Apocryphal Gospels show, and the Trinity Infinity show, because those all feature Chris, who is one of my favorite guests and might be the first 4-time guest who is not involved with Land of the Lost.
Well, Skull, Jack.
Skull. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Garden of Doom, and we will see you all. Well, not see you, but you'll hear us again next week.